In the dark years when the Nazis ruled Europe, thousands of young Allied airmen were shot down over enemy territory. Stranded behind enemy lines, hunted, hidden in attics and cellars, they had almost no way home. But there was one secret path, a chain of brave strangers that ran from Belgium, across occupied France, over a frozen mountain range, and out to freedom. It saved hundreds of men, and it was built and led on foot by a young woman in her 20s. Some people change the world, and the world never learns their name. This is without whom. Her name was Andrée de Jongh, though the men she saved would know her only as Dédée. She was born in 1916 in a suburb of Brussels, the daughter of a schoolmaster. She was small, cheerful, and gentle, with the bright manner of a student on holiday. No one who met her would have guessed that this slight young woman would one day become one of the most wanted people in occupied Belgium. As a girl, she had a heroine, a nurse who, in that very same city, had helped trapped soldiers escape during the First Great War and had been arrested and shot by the Germans for it. The story burned itself into Dédée. She trained as a nurse herself, and she carried a quiet certainty that ordinary people, even gentle ones, could choose to do something extraordinary. Then, in 1940, the German army swept into Belgium and the country fell. Dédée was 23. She volunteered as a Red Cross nurse, caring for wounded and captured Allied soldiers, and everywhere she looked, she saw the same tragedy. Young men, stranded far from home, hiding from the enemy, with no way out. Most people kept their heads down. Dédée decided instead to get them home. It was very nearly madness. The country was crawling with German troops and secret police. Helping a single Allied airman escape was punishable by death, and not only your death, but the death of everyone who had helped you. She had no army, no money, and no experience. She was a young woman with a kind face and an idea that could get her shot. So she began, quietly, to build something. A secret chain of ordinary people willing to risk everything. Shopkeepers and housewives, doctors and farmers who would hide an airman for a night, forge him papers, dress him in civilian clothes, and pass him safely on to the next link. Hand to hand, house to house, all the way south. In time, they gave the chain a name. They called it the Comet Line. But the chain needed an end. A way out of occupied Europe entirely, and Dédée found one. She would lead the men south through France, to the very edge of the country, to a wall of mountains, the Pyrenees. And then, on foot, by smugglers' paths, in the dark, she would walk them over those mountains and down into neutral Spain. The very first time, she made the crossing herself. She walked into a British office on the far side, rescued soldiers beside her, and offered the British a deal. "Fund my line," she said, "and I will keep bringing you back your men." They could hardly believe her. This cheerful girl, who looked like a student, had crossed Nazi Europe and a mountain range on foot. One rescued airman put it plainly. "Our lives," he said, "are going to depend on a schoolgirl." And to the frightened men, Dédée would say, "Call me Dédée. You are my children now, and I will take you home." After weeks of suspicion, the British agreed to pay her costs, and nothing more. She refused to let them run her line, or take it over, or tell her how it should work. It was hers, built by her own people, and she meant to keep it that way. And so the men began to flow. Out of the cellars of Belgium, across France, over the mountains, and home. But the enemy was not blind. The Germans knew these escape routes existed, and they hunted them without mercy, planting informers, turning frightened people, paying well for betrayal. For an escape line, a single traitor was all it took. One weak link, one whispered word, and the whole chain could be ripped apart, link by link, arrest by arrest. And slowly, that began to happen. Friends and helpers were seized, questioned, tortured, and shot. The line bled its bravest people. Dédé's own father, a quiet schoolmaster, had joined her cause and taken charge of the most dangerous work back in Belgium. He was now a hunted man, and every week the circle of danger drew a little tighter around the people she loved most. Still, she would not stop. Again and again she made the crossing, leading small groups of frightened young men south by train and then up into the mountains on foot. Through cold and rain and snow, past patrols, along cliff paths in the dark. More than 100 men she personally walked to freedom, one terrified, exhausting journey at a time. Then came the winter of 1943. Dédée led 3 airmen south as she had so many times before, to a small farmhouse in the foothills, the last shelter before the mountains. But the border river was swollen with rain, far too dangerous to cross. They would have to wait one more night. And in that night, someone betrayed them. At dawn, German soldiers surrounded the house. She was caught at last. Under interrogation, Dédée did something astonishing. She told them the truth, that she was the leader, the one who had built the entire line. She confessed it to draw their suspicion away from her father. But the Germans simply could not believe it. This slight, smiling young woman, the mastermind of the escape route that had humiliated them for years? Impossible. Their own contempt for her saved her life. They did not execute her. Instead, they sent her into the nightmare of the concentration camps, to be starved and worked and slowly destroyed. And the danger she had tried so hard to pull away from her father found him anyway. He was arrested, and not long after, he was shot. The gentle schoolmaster gave his life for the very same cause as his daughter. In the camps, even when the Germans at last began to suspect who they truly held, she hid her identity and survived. For 2 years, she endured what so many others did not. And when the Allies finally broke open the camps in 1945, she walked out alive, a starved ghost of a woman in a prisoner's striped dress, carrying wounds to her health that would never fully heal. She came home to a bitter kind of victory. Her father was gone. Many of her bravest friends were gone, but the line she had built had never stopped. Even without her, others had carried it on, and by the end of the war, it had guided more than 700 Allied men out of the reach of the enemy and safely home. Most people, after all of that, would have rested. Dédée did the opposite. Since the age of 15, she had told friends she had wanted to spend her life caring for the sick. So she went to Africa, and for decades she worked in hospitals for people suffering from leprosy, among the most feared and abandoned patients in the world. The little mother had simply found new children to care for. In time, the world honored her. Britain, America, France, and her own Belgium covered her with medals, and her king made her a countess. But the honor she never lost was a quieter one. For the rest of their lives, the airmen she had led over those mountains remembered the fearless young woman who had called them her children and walked them home. Andrée de Jongh had no weapon but her courage, and no army but a chain of ordinary frightened people who chose to be brave anyway. She looked like a schoolgirl, and she defied the most powerful war machine on earth, on foot, one human life at a time. She believed that anyone, however small, could choose to do something extraordinary. and she spent her life proving it true. The world you live in was built by people you have never heard of. And now, you know one more name: Andrée de Jongh. Like and subscribe and stick around, because the textbooks left a lot out. Thanks for watching.